Well, let's go live here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Weincheck, the director of NAEHS, and we will call to order, council for here in June, so the 169th meeting of the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council. So welcome, everyone, and I need to indicate here that pursuant to the Government in the Sunshine Act, so all aspects of this meeting are open to the public except the review, discussion, and evaluation of grant applications and related information. So with that, I'm going to turn the physical podium and partially a virtual podium over to Dr. Belshaw. David?
Thank you, Rick. So we'll begin today with introductions, and we'll work through our council members. We'll begin with those who are present in the room, starting with Dr. Holian. Yep.
Good morning, I'm Dre Holian, University of Montana.
Yate, good morning. Janet Ingram from Northern Arizona University.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Darrell Hood, professor at The Ohio State University.
Good morning, Maria Savasta Kennedy, clinical professor of law at UNC School of Law.
Good morning, Andrew Geller, senior science advisor at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, ex officio.
And then we'll work through the council members that are on the Zoom, starting with Dr. Bourne. Phil? We're not getting your audio, Phil.
Oh.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Apologies. Hi, Phil Bourne, founding dean of the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia.
Dr. Greenmeyer?
Tim Greenmeyer, University of Pittsburgh.
Dr. Hertzberg-Kyoto?
Irva Hertz-Picciotto, professor, University of California at Davis, director of the Environmental Health Sciences Center.
Dr. Hornbuckle?
Yes, I'm Carrie Hornbuckle. I'm a professor in civil environmental engineering at the University of Iowa and director of the Iowa Superfund Research Program.
And Dr. Jurgensen from University of British Columbia is not going to be with us today. He literally got into Vancouver last night and his furniture is arriving today. So he's not going to be with us today. Dr. Miller.
Gary Miller from Columbia University.
Dr. Mutlu.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Gokhan Mutlu from University of Chicago.
Dr. Penning.
Trevor Penning from the University of Pennsylvania and director of the P30 Environmental Health Sciences Core Center.
And Dr. Vasquez.
Good morning. I am a professor and division head in pharmacology and toxicology at the University of Texas at Austin and director of the molecular oncology program at the Livestrong Cancer Institute.
Dr. Carroll.
Good morning, this is Julia Carroll, the Associate Director for Science for the CDC Division for Environmental Health Sciences Practice and ex officio.
And I don't see Dr. Fitzpatrick on the Zoom. Susie, are you on?
Yes, I'm on here. Susie Fitzpatrick, U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Excellent. Thank you all. And we can then introduce the members of the NAEHS senior leadership. Dr. Archer.
Trevor Archer, Deputy Director, NAEHS.
Dr. Sills.
Robert Sills, Acting Scientific Director, Division of Translational Toxicology.
Jay Ingrid Mathis, Executive Officer.
And Gwen.
Good morning, Gwen Coleman. I'm the Director of the Office of Scientific Coordination, Planning and Evaluation.
And I don't think Paul is on for Darrell yet. Thank you all. So as we get started, I want to remind on some Zoom etiquette. Since this is a hybrid meeting and many of us are present in the room, but many of us are also present on the Zoom. This meeting is being webcast and the public members are all attending via the webcast. They can contact us by emailing the council email address that is present on the webpage. For those on the Zoom, remember to keep your microphone on mute at all times until you are recognized to speak. And we recommend that you keep your video off to maintain bandwidth, make sure that you are off of VPN. Importantly, when we go to break, make sure that you turn your video and mute off, and that you check when you come back from break to make sure that they are off. In previous council meetings and events that we've held, there have been some unfortunate events where people have broadcast themselves in some private conversations. So we want to make sure that you're keeping yourself on mute at all times. At times, when council members need to be absent from the discussions for conflict of interest reasons, we will electronically put you into a Zoom waiting room, or ask that you exit the physical room so that you are absent from discussions that you should not be present for. For those who are on the Zoom, you do not need to leave the Zoom. We'll put you into a waiting room and bring you back into the meeting room when appropriate. For those members of the public who wish to express views regarding any items that are discussed during open sessions, you may do so by sending an email to council using the address listed on the council webpage, which is national.advisory.council@niehs.nih.gov. For any items that we have to take votes on, voting will be recorded electronically via the electronic council book, and Liz can help with working through that when we get to votes. And then I will now go over the confidentiality and conflict of interest procedures. So the policies and procedures for preventing conflict of interest and confidentiality of grant materials are contained in the conflict of interest forms, which have been emailed to the council members this morning by Liz McNair. That document states, this certifies that in the review of applications or projects conducted by the National Advisory and Environmental Health Sciences Council on June 6th to 7th, 2023, I absented myself and I did not participate in the discussion of nor vote on any applications or projects in which I, or to my knowledge, my spouse, minor child, or close professional associates have a financial interest, nor on any applications or projects from an organization or institution where I am an employee, consultant, officer, director, or trustee, am negotiating for employment, or otherwise have a financial interest. In council actions in which we voted on a block of applications or projects without discussing any individual one, the en bloc actions, my vote did not apply to any applications from any institution fulfilling the criteria in the preceding paragraph. Members of council should sign the certification and email them to Liz or leave them in your folder here at the table, whichever is appropriate. And our first action for today is consideration of the February 2023 council meeting minutes. These minutes are available on the NAEHS homepage, and council members were asked to review the minutes before this meeting. They are also included in the electronic council book. I would like to request for a council member to move to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Savasta Kennedy. Can I have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Dr. Holian and Dr. Ingram. Council members, please vote in the electronic council book. And Liz, let me know when we have quorum.
been met.
Thank you, Liz. The next item on the administrative things is to highlight our future meeting dates. We'd like to ask council members to ensure that these dates are on their calendars. These are also in the electronic council book and also on the web page. Of course, today's meeting is June 6th to 7th of 2023. Our next meeting will be in September on the 12th and 13th. And we would like to request that all council members please plan on attending that meeting in person so that we can have a fully in-person meeting for September. The following meeting will be on February 12th and 13th of 2024. And that meeting we will be planning as a purely virtual meeting to avoid any potential travel issues with winter meetings. And then the future dates, please make sure that those are on your calendar, and we'll be deciding as we're getting into 2024 whether those will be in-person, hybrid, or virtual meetings. And then the next item on our agenda, Dr. Wycheck, is a presentation from the Director of NAEHS.
Okay, let's see. You can hear me okay? Terrific. Well, good morning, everyone. And it's, I just want to say right up front that I'm wearing a mask primarily because I had some dental surgery recently. And I'm not going to share some of the visual effects of that with you. But also my jaws and my mouth is not working so great. So I apologize ahead of time if some of my speech is coming out a little bit slurred, but I'll try to slow down, articulate, so at least you can understand what I'm saying. So let's go to the next slide. And I should say right up front that what I'm going to try to do today is spend the bulk of the time discussing strategic issues with you. I mean, you are an advisory council to me and to members of senior leadership, so I'm hoping to spend as much time as possible discussing some strategies as we go forward. But I'll get a few things on the table that may be on your mind to essentially nucleate some of the discussion that we'll be having. So let me just start off with an announcement that I suspect many of you have heard. And if you haven't, then I'm going to make you aware of this, that President Biden has nominated Dr. Bertinelli, who is currently the director of the NCI, as the next director of the NIH. So this is pending, of course, the Senate confirmation. But I can just say personally, Monica's only been with the NIH for a relatively short period of time. But she has extended herself to me. I've extended myself back to her. She doesn't need to be convinced that there are very important environmental influences that can impact cancer and potentially other human disorders. So I think she will be a great partner with us and with the other IC directors at the NIH. So I think she will bring very strong leadership to the NIH, and I'm looking forward to her confirmation and seeing her move into this very important position. So I also want to emphasize that Dr. Tabak has been serving very capably as the acting director of the NIH, and he will continue in that role until the Senate confirms Dr. Bertinelli. So next slide, please. Let me spend just a couple of minutes on budgets. There's a lot of information on the slide here, but let's go to the histograms all the way to the right. So the good news, well, it's good news and challenging news. The good news is that this year we're in pretty good shape. So as you can see that we've actually had a significant bump up in our budget this year. It was about a 3.5% increase in our base labor HHS allocation. Brings us to about $914 million. The Superfund program had a slight bump up of slightly less than 1%. Bringing us up to $83 million. We still get the $10 million from the Department of Energy, and there was a $2.5 million disaster supplement. So we're actually in pretty good shape. The bulk of the increase came from a $40 million appropriation to support the work that's being done on climate change and health. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in my presentation. And that's not just an NIEHS program. In fact, it's not an NIEHS program. It's an NIH-wide collaborative effort to take on the huge challenges associated with climate change and health. So that's for this year, so FY23. So that means we actually have some money to support innovative new things and to support, say, stipend increases and some of the other things that are happening this year. But next year is all the way on the right, and that's the president's budget. Now, usually the president's budget is the rosiest budget coming in, and that President Biden has been very supportive of the work at NIH and NIEHS. And so this year, his budget came in, and we're essentially flat from where we were last year, with the exception being an additional $25 million for supporting the climate change and health program. So what that means is that we're going to have some challenges if that's in fact the case. Of course, we don't know until the House and the Senate weigh in, and then ultimately there's an appropriation that comes through, so we know what our budget for FY24 will be. But if it is flat, as everyone is predicting, in fact, the word that I'm getting is, quote, flat is good. Okay, so I don't know how things are at the EPA and other agencies, but the information we're getting is flat is good. So the challenge is, research costs. We all know research costs are going up. Salaries are going up. Stipends for postdocs and trainees are going up. So the challenge is how do we use a flat budget in FY24 to continue to move environmental health sciences forward. So we're going to talk more about this, and Dr. Bellishaw is going to share some ideas with you, and as the advisory committee to the director and senior leadership, we want to hear what you have to say. So if there's any input that you want to give us as we plan for a flat FY24 budget, we'd be, our ears are open. We're very interested to hear what you have to say. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the details, but we've been very actively interacting with our appropriators in both the House and the Senate. So we've had an opportunity to actually meet with the new majority staff in the House I&E subcommittee that supports the Superfund research program. Just wanted to make sure that they're aware of the great things that we do and hopefully trying to help them understand, it would be nice to have a slightly higher increase in that Superfund appropriation. We've also been interacting with the senators from Pennsylvania and Ohio. And as you can imagine, they're very interested in knowing what can the NIH be doing after the East Palestine disaster. In fact, we're doing quite a bit along those lines, and I'll talk briefly about that in just a few minutes. So we've also been very actively engaged in discussions with the members of the House and the Senate around the NIH-wide program on climate change and health. So we've met, in fact, generally speaking, I think the feedback we're getting has been extremely positive. And I mean, in several instances, the comment back is, wow, you're working as an NIH-wide collaborative effort? Really? Say that again. So I think we're getting a lot of kudos. And furthermore, it just makes sense. So this is much bigger than what any single IC can do on their own. So we're working collaboratively and under the very capable leadership of Gwen Coleman, in that there's a lot of things to be coordinating. So I'll talk about that in more detail in just a few minutes. Next slide. So I also wanted to point out that we continue to build what I consider to be a very strong and diverse leadership team here at NIEHS, and you've met at least one of the new members this morning, so let's go to the next slide. And I wanted to confirm, since we last met in February, Dr. Bellishaw, who was functioning as the acting director of DERT, and I've chosen that he's the right person. So he has now moved into the position as the permanent, permanent as long as permanent can be. But David is stepped into that role. Congratulations, David. It's been just a pleasure working with you. And he is representing the Division of Extramural Research and Training really quite well and serving as a very interactive and a strong member of the Senior Leadership Committee. Next slide. And I also wanted to point out Dr. Sills, who is the acting director of the Division of Translational Toxicology. So so to fill that role once Brian Berridge left, I decided to actually employ a competitive search or a competitive process. So whereas I could have just appointed someone, we thought it's best to actually open different possibilities. So Dr. Sills competed with others, and in the end, it was very clear that Robert brings incredible capabilities to represent the interests of the Division of Translational Toxicology. And I have to say, just on a personal level, it's been just a real pleasure working with him. He's been a very interactive member of the Senior Leadership Committee. So welcome, Robert. Next slide. And I don't have any specific information for you about what's going to happen with the permanent director of the DTT. So the search committee, which was chaired by Joni Rutter, who is the director of NCATS, has finished their work. And so they have evaluated qualifications of quite a number of candidates. And so I was on the Zoom with Joni I think it was last Friday. So she will be sending to me specific recommendations on individuals that they will recommend that we bring here for interviews at NAEHS. So stay tuned. I'm hoping in the next week, or maybe the next maximum week or two, that I'll be able to announce this, and we'll have these individuals interviewing for the position. So stay tuned. Next slide. So let me also talk about the strategic planning that's been going on. So next slide. Since the last time we've met, we have actually Dr. Newton once again brought her magical powers of open space and coordinated what we call the NAEHS Strategic Plan Stakeholder Community Workshop. So back in August of 2021, soon after I got here, we first did open space, and that was an opportunity for members across the environmental health sciences community. In that case, it was in person. It was at the Sheraton Imperial. And it was to bring in a diverse cross-section of the community, and if there are ideas and powerful things that you want to get on the table as part of the deliberation for coming up with a strategic plan, it's an opportunity to do that. So this time, actually, we did it virtually. In fact, I think I've discovered, I don't know if Sheila can speak to this too, I think actually the virtual is even more powerful because you don't have to actually physically jump on a plane and spend 2.5 days with us here. But it's an opportunity to get your ideas on the table and then engage in a discussion. So if you have an idea and you put it on the table, then you agree to lead a discussion and write a report, and then this report gets bound together and it comes to us and to me and to the leadership team to factor into our planning for the development of the next strategic plan. So next slide. So in that 2.5-day virtual workshop, there were 68 different issues, felt like 600, but so 68 different issues and opportunities that were raised. Over the course of the 2.5 days, we had 136 different participants. Some people participated for the entire 2.5-day period. Others were on for bits and pieces as their schedules allowed. But nevertheless, we had an opportunity to hear what they had to say. So there were 43 different working sessions, each lasting 90 minutes. And there were 8 different issues that percolated to the top as a result of these 2.5 days of planning. Next slide. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on during the Q&A, and we can talk about this. So climate change and health was probably the top item that percolated to the top. Workforce diversity and trainee recruitment was also very important. We've got to keep it in mind. Evidence-based interventions and implementation science and solutions-based research was clearly very important. Emerging contaminants. How do we stay ahead of the curve? I mean, it's nice to think that we actually will develop a strategy so we're not constantly looking behind the things that are already in the water supply. What can we be doing to get in front of this? 5th was informatics, advances to support evidence-based decisions. 6th was joint effects of chemical and non-chemical stressors, very much in the context of this exposomic sort of framework that we've been talking about. The 7th was precision environmental health and how to address the heterogeneity that exists. How do individuals respond differently to the environment? And then the 8th is developing and building confidence in human-based new approach methods, or abbreviated the NAMs. So this is a area I have to say I'm, more recently have come to appreciate that the NAMs technology is really very important. It's not just in toxicology science and NIEHS, but broadly across the biomedical enterprise. So lot of interest in development of of NAEHS technologies. Next slide. So that's where we were with the strategic engagement. And what I'd like to do is spend just a little bit of time now talking about following up and giving you a progress report on some of the other areas of strategic priority. So we talked about this the last time and the time before that. There are certain areas of scientific priority that the senior leadership team and those of us here at NAEHS have really been thinking about. What can we be doing to bolster our efforts in these areas? So these are not the only areas, but we spent a lot of time talking about climate change and health, environmental justice and health disparities. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it in my presentation, but tomorrow afternoon session is really dedicated to DEIA, and we're going to talk a lot about environmental justice and health disparities tomorrow afternoon. Computational biology and data science is something we've been doing a lot of planning on. Again, the limitation of time, I'm not going to talk about it today. Mechanistic translational toxicology, again, an area of interest. But I'm going to focus on progress that we've made on the exposome, precision environmental health, as well as climate change and health. Next slide. So let's go into exposomics. So next slide, just reminding everyone. So the exposome, taking us back to 2005 and Chris Wilde. So this is really, it's the framework, the experimental framework, where if we really want to understand the impact of the environment, we have to get beyond studying a pesticide or groups of mixtures of pesticides, or plastics and plasticizers, which we're coming to realize are increasingly important as contaminants within our environment. We have to be doing all the different things in the lower panel, but it can't be just about the physical chemical impacts of the environment. It also has to be integrated with the social, the ecosystems, and lifestyle variables. So the challenge is to really figure out, well, how do we do an exposomics experiment? So I think we've all embraced this. The exposome has been with us for quite a number of years. And now we're really thinking about how do we operationalize this? In fact, next slide. At this podium, about 2 years ago, Dr. Miller. And sorry, Gary, I'm using this slide once again, but I think you really touched the nerves. We really need an operational definition of the exposome. And so we've been working on that. He indicated at a presentation he gave to council that we may need to build new technologies to capture the exposome, but we can actually get started with doing the things that we know how to do, something he called the pragmatic exposome. I actually like that. So there are tools like high-resolution mass spectrometry. So let's deploy them and bring them to bear on getting beyond one exposure at a time. So we actually talked about, in fact, this very much resonates with me, that this could be modeled on what happened in the genomics community. So back, 25, 30 years ago, genomics was the science to get beyond one gene at a time. And so they did this with some pretty primitive technologies, but it was a start. Get started with the things that you can do. And over the course of time, we're actually now at a point where we have some remarkably powerful tools to get beyond one gene at a time. So we're using those tools, but let's model if we can do the same thing in the environmental health sciences community, along with exposomics. So let's do what we can do now, and with a mindset to develop clever new, say, wearable technologies or other technologies that will help us to capture the exposome in the future. So I'm just, as a comment here, I think there's a very important, the role for NHGRI in genomics has kind of changed. So 30 years ago, if you were doing genomics, you were probably either at or supported by NHGRI. But over the course of time, the genomics technology has really become essentially widely dispersed throughout the biomedical community. So NHGRI now is still focused on genomics, but they're focusing a lot on what are the next generation of technologies? What's the cutting edge of innovative new approaches for doing genomics? So, can NAEHS be taking on some of the same role? And I'll talk just in a few minutes. I think the concept of exposomics is catching fire. So other institutes, it's not just NAEHS that are promoting this. So we have to be thinking about what can we be doing then with the modest budget that we have to really accelerate and promote exposomic science. Next slide. So one of the things, I actually mentioned this last February, we did have, as a follow-up to Gary's presentation, Michelle Bennett and several of you in council and as members of the environmental health sciences community engaged in a set of workshops. And the idea was to define, what do we measure as part of exposomic science? How do we measure it? What are the methods that we're going to need? How do we share and harmonize the data? How do we integrate, analyze, and interpret the data in a way that we can ultimately translate and have an impact on precision environmental health and biomedical research? So there was a report that came out of these workshops. There were 64 different issues that were identified by the community. And one of the key things is that moving forward, we need a center that can help to address some of these questions and to integrate the ideas that are coming in from across the environmental health sciences and biomedical communities. So next slide, and just to remind you, Yusha Shui spoke to this point. In fact, Council gave us an approval last February that we will be funding a center referred to as the Global Exposome Research Coordination to accelerate precision environmental health. And the goal of this center is to really develop a framework for exposomics, promote best practices in data collection and sharing, and build global exposome research, build the exposome research community to include and foster national and international collaborations. So there are three different elements of this. The first is, again, developing that conceptual framework. What is exposomics? Then developing and really developing agreed upon and standard operating procedures. So what are those technologies that we're all going to be using to capture exposomic data? And to capture in a way that it becomes seamlessly integratable across different data repositories across the world. And furthermore, the third component here is something I'm very interested in. We need to build that global exposome research community and foster national and international collaborations. So this is really important. So as we continue to go forward on this, it has to be about global collaboration. And we shouldn't be competing with the European Union. We should be working in concert with them. Developing the framework, developing the tools for collecting the data, and then building data repositories. So whether your data is coming from different parts of the world, it all seamlessly integrates together to help contribute to our better understanding of the totality of exposures over the life course. So next slide. And actually promoting, so with this vision, there's been efforts to promote exposomic science and to do this on an international scale. So I want to specifically call out Bob Wright and his colleagues at the Mount Sinai Institute for Exposomics Research, as well as Gary Miller and others who have really been promoting the idea of let's get the word out, let's start talking about exposomics, and to do this in very specific ways. So they have co-organized a number of meetings. I was privileged to be able to give the keynote talk at a meeting last April. It was entitled Exposomics Approaches, Climate Change, Health, and Sustainability. So this was co-organized together with the University of Brescia. So we had a wonderful meeting there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next slide. So we talked about exposomics approaches and things that need to be happening. And how it's really important that the efforts within the United States are well coordinated with the efforts that are happening across Europe. So there was also a meeting that Dr. Archer represented the NAEHS and gave a keynote talk at a meeting in Mexico at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And the focus of that meeting was on the urban exposome. So that was just a couple of weeks ago in May of 2023. So there's also a meeting that's being planned for at Meharry Medical College. This would be in January of 2024, and the focus of that would be children's health, environmental justice, and the exposome. And I understand, and Gary, during the Q&A, you might want to give us an update on this, but my understanding is that there will be a meeting on exposomics and aging that is being planned for happening sometime in 2024 in Japan. So stay tuned. So we're getting the word out. We're getting people talking about this and talking about collaborating and working synergistically together. Next slide. So one of the really interesting things after the Brescia meeting, so Yusha Shui and Gary Miller and Bob Wright and others organized a kind of a strategy session. So we spent several hours together. We talked about the presentations that we had just heard at the meeting, and we also talked about the future of exposomics. And one thing that we wanted to clarify is, what is exposomics? I mean, is it just another terminology for environmental health sciences, but it has an omics component of it, so it makes it kind of upbeat and makes people feel like they're doing something right on the cutting edge? Or is it truly a different way of doing environmental health sciences? So I think coming out of that meeting, we actually decided that exposomics is different. It's not environmental health sciences. It's a new approach to studying the impact of the environment. So I think that was very important to clarify that. In fact, I'm going to come back to this during our Q&A. I'd like to get input from members of council. What's your opinion on that? So the other thing that we talked about is, if we want exposomics to take off and to kind of proliferate throughout the biomedical community as well as the environmental health sciences community, you want to come up with a very powerful vision for exposomics, similar to what Francis Collins and others did for genomics. So if we want to get potentially a large chunk of money, a chunk of change to actually support exposomic science, what is that powerful vision? I mean, what is exposomics and how is it potentially transformative to the way that we do environmental health sciences? So I'm going to talk to council about that as well. So take your notes, and we'll come back to that. And I want to talk about the need for that powerful vision for exposomics going forward. How am I doing? Is my jaw still holding out here? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, just a little update on where we are with precision environmental health. So next slide, just a reminder. So I first became aware of this terminology when Drs. Baccarelli, Walker, and Dolan presented at this podium about a year and a half ago. And this is a program that was designed, or it's designed specifically to address the individual variability that happens in response to environmental exposure. So it complements the precision medicine initiative. The goal is to ultimately individualize, to understand individual risk to prevent disease. So it's this concept of precision prevention is something that has emerged from the PEH. And as Cheryl indicated, is that PEH is really it's the intersection of genetics, epigenetics, environment, and omics. So and just as a reminder, the genetics part and the epigenetics part are complicated. So there's no single gene that, when mutated or somehow structurally altered, is responsible for differential effects of benzene, differential effects of air pollution. So these are all, there's clearly a genetic component of this, but it's not a single gene, it's a complex trait, which means that there's potentially tens, potentially hundreds of different genes with sequence variants that are responsible for that differential effect. So next slide. So how do we take that on? Does the environmental health sciences community have to start our own genetics and genomics effort to identify those complex traits? And I think the answer is no, we don't need to do that. We can partner with some of the big genetics and genomics efforts that are out there that are studying the complex traits associated with human disease. So most notably, we have at the NIH, it's the All of Us program, which actually I'll talk about this in the next slide, but this is a real opportunity to join forces with genetics and genomics community to bring environmental health sciences and exposomics, integrate this into these sequencing and genome characterization efforts. Next slide. In fact, so just as a reminder, the All of Us program it's a 1 million-person cohort that is being managed by Josh Denny, who's the CEO of the All of Us program. And this is all about individualized prevention, treatment, and care. And it's designed to provide access to expansive healthcare data from diverse populations. So they are very specifically designing this so that they're paying attention to diversity. They want to make sure that this million-person cohort has the diverse representation that you would see across the United States. And they're doing actually a fabulous job on this. So next slide. So you can see here in this pie chart, they've concentrated a lot on the genomics and the wearables and biospecimen collection, electronic health records, and more recently, they've become very interested in incorporated into the All of Us program the environmental data. So that's really good news. So, and I think they recognize, and Josh Denny, as well as Jeff Ginsburg, and Jeff is the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer for the All of Us program. They recognize that people get sick, not just because of their genes, but they get sick because of the environmental exposures. And they get sick because of the different exposomic types of exposures that can influence human health. So they are very interested in working with us and integrating exposomic science into the All of Us program. Next slide. So the proposal is to actually move forward, and we're moving forward on this. So the phase one is to actually include address information and zip codes. For there are about, 650,000 participants currently. Getting this information, and so once you know where people live, where they've lived in the past, where they work, that will allow you then in phase two to start connecting those health consequences with geospatial environment and social determinants of health, which is kind of a logical thing that we can be doing. So once you know address and zip codes and other information, you can make these powerful connections. There's also an attempt now in terms of phase three is taking it beyond just geospatial data and beginning to look at the more detailed exposomics data collection. But let me just, next slide. This is just to emphasize that the phase one and two is what's happening now is getting the information into the All of Us cohort, the information there, so that the geospatial data, and you have this functionality tool for the All of Us workbench where you can connect now environmental exposures with individuals that are part of the program. So as well as, and probably most notably, it allows you to connect with the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. So we can make that connection. And then ultimately, you can be studying those gene by environment effects. So with the All of Us program, they're doing whole genome sequencing. They're doing analysis of complex traits. So now we have that opportunity to bring the environmental exposures, overlaying it on these genetics and genomics efforts. Next slide. So let's see, in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about phase three, but basically it's phase three is to kind of take it beyond just the GIS coordinates. David Belshaw has been working together with Jeff Ginsburg, and as well as Alison Matzinger-Reif and Jan Hall and others, is doing a pilot. So can we truly bring some of the powerful tools, the pragmatic exposome, high-resolution mass spectrometry? Can we analyze some of the samples that are currently part of the All of Us program, and then start beginning to understand the impact of the environment versus just the impact of sequence variations on one's genome? So hopefully we'll have more data to report on that the next time that we meet, but stay tuned. I mean, the good news here is that Jeff and Josh gave a presentation on this concept to something called the All of Us Brain Trust, which is a monthly or quarterly meeting of all of the IC directors at the NIH. And that's where Josh tells us about new things that are happening. So he presented this concept that we're bringing environmental health and environmental exposures into the All of Us program. And it was amazing. So once they did their presentation, the comments that were coming from IC directors, the first one is, well, it's about time that we're bringing environmental exposures into this program. And another, commented how GIS data is just a no-brainer. So we're really pleased that this is moving along, and so that's good. But they are also very interested, well, okay, this phase 3 with, it's a type 2 diabetes. That's nice, but what about all of the other things we're interested in? So can we now start planning for the future where we can bring high-power exposomics tools into the All of Us program in a more proactive way? So stay tuned on that. I think it's just very encouraging. Again, thanks to David for his leadership and working together with Jeff Ginsburg and Allison Motzinger-Rafe and many others. We've really engaged in some very productive collaborative discussions. Next slide. So, okay, so let's see. I'm at about 30 minutes, and tell you what, I'm going to skip over the climate change and health, only because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for discussion. So who's running the slides? Can we go to just some recent updates? So let's go through these, And again, I'll talk more about these. Many of these things I talked about last time. I just wanted to reinforce what's going on. So let's keep going. Okay, working collaboratively across the NIH. So let me just quickly say that this, I think as I've mentioned to you in the past, this is a personal passion of mine. Environmental health is critically important, not just for the environmental health sciences community, but we need to be working collaboratively. Next slide. In fact, we're developing a lot of traction on this. So in the whole area of the East Palestine chemical spill, I mean, this is a real disaster in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And in the past, NAEHS would step to the plate and maybe work together with EPA. Really pleased to say under the leadership of Aubrey Miller, I mean, it turns out that there is a trans-NIH effort on DR2. So we've engaged many of the other ICs. So we're doing this not just on our own now, but we have several other ICs who are actually putting skin in the game and saying, look, we'll put some money on the table here to work together with NAEHS. You don't need to do it on your own. We're there with you. So I think it's a great message. So next slide. And I think the idea here is that we want to develop a workshop where we bring together subject matter experts and plan out what is it that the NIH, not just as NIEHS, but what can the NIH as a whole bring to bear on addressing some of the challenges associated with East Palestine. So stay tuned. Next slide. Also, last time we had a meeting in February, Richard Hodis, the director of NIA, was here talking about the excitement. I think it's abundantly clear that the National Institute on Aging understands that there are environmental factors, and they really bought into the whole exposomics framework around studying the age-related diseases. So developing biomarkers is something that we've been working very much in concert with them. In fact, Michelle Heacock has been a driver to work with them on developing better tools for telomere measurements. And they're also very interested, as we are, in gene-environment interactions as it relates to aging-related outcomes. So there's a lot of work going on. Next slide. And in fact, I just want to alert you, there are a number of NOFOs that have been issued by NIA. So they bought into this concept. They're working on exposomic science and really moving it ahead. Next slide. And so actually, next slide. So it's... And it turns out that NIAMS also, Lindsay Criswell is the relatively new director of NIAMS, and she's very interested in studying the impact of the exposome on autoimmune disease. So they have actually, with Dr. Belshaw and his colleagues in DERT, helped to write a funding opportunity, and this is all about studying the exposome on autoimmune diseases. So they want to capture, testing novel and developing those cutting-edge technologies, combined with data science to study the impact of the environment on autoimmunity. Next slide. We're continuing to work with the NCI. There's a workshop that will be coming up at the end of this month. It's really about using omics data as signatures to study the environmental exposures in cancer. Next slide. Now, just very quickly here, next slide. I want to acknowledge a member of our council here, so Dr. Hollian. was named to the College of Fellows of the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering, so congratulations. This was really for his fundamental work, understanding bioactivity and toxicity of nanomaterials. Next slide. I also want to acknowledge Shri Natador, Dr. Natador, and Dr. Walker, and Dr. Castronova for the award that they received, the SOT Nanoscience and Advanced Materials Special Awards for their leadership in nanoscience research. Next slide. Also want to acknowledge Carmen Williams, Dr. Williams, who is one of the newest members of the AAAS Fellows. So she is one of the members of our intramural research program here, and she was recognized for her distinguished contributions to reproductive and developmental biology. So congratulations, Carmen. Next slide. And I also want to recognize, so it's Xuan He is an NAEHS grantee. He was awarded the prestigious Wolf Prize around his discoveries of reversible RNA methylation and its role in gene expression. So he is really opening up another area of epigenetic science. So it's not just epigenetic changes to DNA, but there are quite a number of different epigenetic changes to RNA that can be influencing how genes are being expressed. And these are influenced by environmental exposures. So next slide. So I will finish up here, and Dr. Belshaw will do his report, the DERT reporting, and we'll talk about some of the challenges for the budget. Kelly Ferguson, who is one of our intramural investigators, Dr. Ferguson will talk about her work on phthalate exposure and impact on preterm birth. Noni Burns, who's the director of CSR, will be here to talk about the initiative to strengthen peer review. I'm sure that you will all find that to be quite interesting. Next slide. And then Dr. Archer will lead us in a discussion on the issues around DEIA, REAPs, and quite a number of other things, and that will happen tomorrow at our conference. So next slide. So with that, I'm going to pause, and let's open it for discussion. So let's see. Okay, next slide. So let's start off with these 8 areas of focus that percolated to the top of the stakeholder community workshop just a few weeks ago. So let's open it for discussion. So members of council, so what are your thoughts? Are there any things that you feel should be in the top 8 that you want me, as well as members of the leadership team, to be considering as we cobble together the strategic plan? Or does this seem like it's a pretty accurate reflection of some of the top priorities? So Andrew, it looks like you're...
Yeah, just a reminder for council members, please, in the Zoom, use the raise hand feature so that we can queue up and have an orderly discussion. Thank you.
Yes, Rick, I noticed in your other graphic showing the topics identified, you included environmental justice and community. That may be an overlay on all of these, particularly joint effects of chemical and non-chemical stressors, but is that an overlay on all of these? Or
yeah, I think it's an overlay, and I think workforce diversity training. So that was a topic that was kind of permeated a lot of the discussions at the stakeholder meeting. I don't know, Sheila, do you want to add anything to that? So it's clearly an area of great importance for NAEHS. I just want to make sure, let me reassure you that that's solidly on our radar screen. Sheila, you want to comment?
Yeah, short answer is yes. It's important to the Institute, it's important to the administration, and we've already included it in a lot of our efforts so far. It's a big part of the Climate and Health Initiative already, and I think going forward we can sort of see how many of those things would contribute to overall environmental justice work. So yeah. It's definitely, I would say that the top 8 issues, I wouldn't think of them necessarily as the large scale of everything. These just represent the things that percolated to the top of the people who happened to be in the meeting. And of the 43 papers that were written as part of the breakout groups in the stakeholder workshop. Then the last day had a special exercise where people got to vote on the people who were in the room, the people are on the Zoom, got to vote on those papers, and then also see how some of them connected together. So you had the ones at the top, but then you had others that were connected to them. And so this is an incomplete statement of the landscape that's part of the plan, or that will be part of the plan. But it represents some things that people thought were particularly important of the 43 things they had to look at.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Again, you talked about environmental health and disparities. And so understanding there's so many ways of doing these kind of strategic planning. One is integrating, for example, justice, equity, and disparities into everything one does, and you try to institutionalize it. Another way is making it a separate topic. Mm-hmm. So clearly, as you go forward, you'll make your decisions on that.
Yep.
And I know it is at the top of your list, and then it becomes in the details of how it's incorporated.
Actually, Trevor, Dr. Archer, do you want to comment on this? So this is, I think environmental justice is one of the key areas that NAEHS has historically. It's probably the institute of the NIH that has really embraced environmental justice and has made it a priority, but it clearly will continue to be. So Dr. Archer, do you want to comment on our plans going forward on this?
Sure, Rick, happy to. As you indicated, of course, many of us are aware that the work of our prior director, Dr. Ken Olden, this is really centered on this issue about environmental justice, and it has a particular history, of course, in North Carolina and its origins. And so the Institute has embraced the concepts, and we have a interdivisional working group that's focused on health disparities and environmental justice that are involved in a number of activities in terms of interacting with the community, promoting research. And then we also have a number of our colleagues who are on important administrative working groups. For example, Sharon Beard in DRT is on the White House Council for Environmental Justice. I can't remember the exact acronym. I think it's called WEJAC. So it's been an area of broad interest and value for the Institute. And as you said, Dr. Geller, we really tried to have it be embedded into all of the things that we do to give it that sort of primacy of thought.
Sounds good. Other thoughts about some of these 8 areas?
So Rick, we have several council members with their hands raised in the Zoom. Yep. So starting with Dr. Holian.
Thank you. And I participated in that effort that took place back then. There's a lot there on consideration of the exposome and technology. What I felt is missing in all of this is less on what are the outcomes and what about chronic diseases, which is the major thing that most of us are worried about, along with aging. So there's a lot on the front end, but what about the back end? That's just my observation of this.
Okay. So, well noted. Let me just reassure you, though, that personally, part of my interest is getting our work integrated with things that are happening at aging, at cancer, and at some of the other ICs, NINDS, really bringing some of those biological disease-related outcomes and integrating it together with environmental health sciences. Is that what you're getting at, or am I missing the point?
Yeah, partially. The other point that I keep wondering about, and maybe this is a little offbeat, but are we always engaged with the medical community in terms of their training for using all of these technologies in the future? Because I see this now almost as if a patient goes in for an exam, has the blood work done, has mass spec done and all these other things in order to be examined. And I just see this as being kind of an overwhelming source of data that may not be, going to be difficult to use.
Well, it's an it's a lot of data, but that's what we need to truly understand the totality of environmental exposures. I mean, if you just look at the Genome Project, there's a lot of data in a genome sequence. So you're going to have billions of nucleotides of information. You're going to learn more about sequence variations in multiple genes. So the genetics and genomics community are working with physicians. How do you take that information and somehow bring it to the bedside so that there's useful clinical information that you can convey to your patients? So part of and hopefully we can get in and talk about this vision for exposomics. There has to be an equivalent effort in terms of the environment, but together with genetics and genomics. So if there are environmental exposures that may be predisposing to Parkinson's or other neurological diseases, your physician needs to know that, okay? And because the etiology of the disease may be different than Parkinson's that may be driven strictly by allelic variants. So I think the answer to your question is that this has to be part of a comprehensive effort to bring in the medical community and help them to understand, and we need to package this up in a way that physicians can take this information to their patients and to let them know how they use this information to advance their own health. So I think part of the reason that I'm interested in the partnership with the All of Us program is that they're interested in that patient interface, getting the information out there. And now that we have the interest in environmental exposures, that has to be part of the educational process. So physicians need to know what to do with all this information that they're getting. Does that answer your question? I'm totally on board with you on this. In fact, in my previous job, I was very interested in getting out in front of the medical societies just to help them understand what are some recent things that are happening in the realm of precision medicine. So there's lots of changes that are happening, and physicians, there need to be educational programs to bring physicians on board with us.
So next
David?
up in the queue is Dr. Penning.
Okay, Trevor?
Hi, Rick. These are really nice 8 points you have here. A few comments for you. Number 2, workforce diversity and trainee recruitment. I think this is a little bit too narrow. One of the things I'm seeing from many ICs right now is the concept for plans for enhanced diversity perspectives. And I did come across a slide, I think it was an NAEHS slide, which actually defined this as being who should do the work, which gets to the workforce diversity and training recruitment. But there were 2 other components to it. One was who should the participants be in research, getting at the fact that we deal with diverse populations, and where should the work be done, meaning that maybe the work doesn't always have to be done at an academic institution, it can be done in the community, and especially a diverse community. So I think number 2 is a little bit too narrow from my perspective. So that was one point I had. Another point I had was, I think implementation science is really very, very important. Many of us spend our times trying to push the envelope in both basic science and translational science, but often the implementation component of what we do with those findings is given a small change. And I think this is really important. It may not be as innovative as the next best discovery, but to actually show that what you've discovered can actually improve public health is really important. And the other one I had was on number 7, precision in environmental health and how to address heterogeneity. I think the concept we need to get across is the issue of multi-omic traits, whereby rather than thinking about complex genetic traits, which has been the run-of-the-mill for a while, we need to think about combining omics data and integrating it to come up with an explanation for the phenome that we actually see in patients.
I think those are all extremely relevant comments. But in the interest of making sure we can hear from other council members, I think we should probably move on.
Yep.
So Trevor, we can be talking more about those points, all really good points.
Indeed.
David?
Yep. And next is Dr. Vasquez.
Hello. Yeah. Great presentation, Rick. These 8 points are outstanding. They're sort of all encompassing, but then a bit narrow. It's difficult with a bullet point to really understand everything that goes into each one of these points. But to that point, I think that number 3, number 7, actually all of them should have elements of basic mechanistic research so that we understand what we're doing with the big data sets, et cetera. And I think that is probably meant to be there, but I don't actually see it explicitly stated, which is critical. Also in number 5, are we thinking about, in addition to informatics, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence? I mean, that's clearly become a big issue for us at journals, as editors in chief of journals and that kind of thing. There are obviously pros and cons to it, but it's something that is there and we have to deal with it. And so I'd just like your thoughts on artificial intelligence, and is that included in bullet point 5?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence, I mean, so my perspective on this, and I think I'm reflecting the discussions that happened at the workshop as well as discussions that are happening across the Institute. AI is with us, and it's going to continue to mature, and we have to make sure we harness this in ways that can serve our interests. But fundamental to doing AI-based work, you need quality data sets. So it's all, AI and machine learning is all based on having the types of data repositories that accurately reflect the, say, environmental exposures that individuals are being exposed to. So that, Karen, that in fact, maybe that should be a discussion for a broad-based discussion at our September meeting. So AI and the impact on environmental health, biomedical science, lots of discussion that's happening on that. So
I think so, and also in regard to sort of ethical parameters in the use of AI.
Yep.
And yeah, we should allow, or what we should encourage and put out there as, you as the representative of environmental health. Thank you.
Yeah, so in the interest of making sure we get a couple more comments, Karen, thanks for bringing that up. And again, David, let's talk about putting that on as an agenda for September.
And just to highlight, there is a meeting at the National Academies next week on AI and ML in environmental health sciences. Gary Miller is next.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah, I'm here. I think that in looking at these 8 points that came out from the stakeholder community workshop, the slide you showed after this with the Institute's 5 the emerging scientific priority areas really capture the majority of these items, because there's the mechanistic toxicology, the precision health, the climate change, the environmental justice and health disparities, and the computational piece. And really the only thing missing is the workforce diversity and training recruitment, which I think is embedded in all of those. So to me, it seems like what the Institute is thinking is very well aligned with what the stakeholders and community members were thinking about it. So it's really, in a way, like even those 5 pieces, I think distill these 8 in a very effective way.
No, I think that's, and we appreciate your active participation in that stakeholder community workshop. So I think that actually is a pretty accurate reflection, summary. I mean, the advantage of the graphics that I showed after this slide during my presentation is that you'll notice that they're all kind of interconnected. So it's none of these stand alone. And so I think that's part of our challenge, is that basic mechanistic research is fundamental to understanding the impact of the environment and understanding the role of climate. So there are lots of interconnected issues. David, do we have time for one more comment?
We have 4 more minutes, and we have 4 hands raised. So I think if we're efficient, we can get through all the comments. Next is Dr. Bourne.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation. Karen made most of my point. I I mean, I've just re-emphasized it in the context of AI as a predictive tool. The power of it is just gone crazy in the last few months, and it really is quite something to be looking at, and it's great that the Academy is doing something there, so I won't say any more about that. The other point I wanted to make was you sort of, Rick, you highlighted the notion of analogies with genomics and also the global nature of those efforts and as it relates particularly to data. I mean, in some ways that's not been successful in the notion there's lots of exchange that goes on, but there's also lots of individuality across continents. And I think, there might be an opportunity here with the exposomics to actually come up with a new model that is more integrative across continents. I know it's a lot of hard work, but it would be, it gets back to earlier discussions we've had about sustainability. Going it alone is unsustainable. And so thinking about it on the global scale seems to make perfect sense to me.
Phil, I just have to make a quick comment. You're absolutely correct. I think with the exposomics community, we have an opportunity to do things better, do things right. And so the genomics community started off in a bad way. So it was really about the efforts at different sequencing centers competing with each other, and the US effort competing with the European effort. That's just nonsense. And I think what we learned from that is that ultimately, if we actually want to achieve the goal, we have to start working together. So that's why I say let's learn from the genomics community, the less than optimal things from the genomics community, as well as real potential. But and part of it's going to be, as I've done, hopping on an airplane with the invitation from Bob and Gary and others. I'm getting out there. I'm talking about the interest that we have in not just siloing what we do, but the future is really in sharing and working collaboratively together. And the whole issue too, I'll just comment about AI. So we have to get beyond studying just exposomics or just genomics or just transcriptomics. So that's where I think AI and machine learning are going to be powerful tools to actually integrate these different omics data sets together in a way that can help us to understand complex biology. So we'll talk more about that in September. David, do we have time for one more? So thanks for those comments.
We do. Irva Hertzberg-Kyoto.
Irva.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I agree with a lot of the things that have already been said, and I'm not going to repeat them. And especially Gary's last comment that this seemed to coincide and dovetail very nicely with the Institute's priorities. But I also found this one kind of exciting. The emphasis on interventions and really public health translation of all the science that we do. I wanted to comment on climate change and health and how we know such a tiny, minuscule fraction of what the health effects of climate change are, that it's just, I'm hoping we will have some, I know this is going to come up when we start talking about budget and all of that coming up in David Balshaw's presentations to come. So I really look forward to that part of the conversation. And then the other one I wanted to point out, I think it was number 6, I think it was 6, which was the chemical and non-chemical stressors and the importance of that. And I think this is one of those things where the basic biology has to come into that, because Chirag Patel published a paper a number of years ago about how the impossibility, just taking one omics and overlaying it with another omics and trying to look at, let's say, every combination and permutation possible, and it would bust every computer we have today and could take trillions of years or whatever to actually look at all of that. So it's got to be guided, everything we do on the omics scale has to be guided by the basic biology that says, okay, given all of these data, where do we think the the hot areas are, what rises to the top within any particular domain. And I think, the exposomics, obviously chemical and non-chemical is part of the exposomics. But I think looking at that from both the informatic side, the permutation combinatorial side, but also that has to be informed by the basic biology. So I see no I didn't see a gap there. I just saw an opening, an opportunity in that particular component. So those are my thoughts.
Great comments. So thanks, Irva. And Dave, do we have time for one more, or do we
are
need to move
at
on?
time for this. Jenny and Daryl both have their hands raised, but maybe we can have those conversations over lunch.
Actually, can we just do one more?
Sure, Jenny.
Actually, just quickie comments from the two people actually in the room.
Yeah, just thank you for your presentation. And just my comment is working with communities and I know it's probably outside of the scope of NAEHS, but partnerships with how to fix the problem. Because we're getting more communities saying we're studied to death, we know where there are problems, how do you fix them? And it's really feels terrible as a researcher to say, I don't have the money to do that. So just figuring out those partnerships to try and really address so that their children and grandchildren and so forth can live.
Well, I'm glad you had a chance to make that comment, because I want to reassure you that this is something we're actively working on. In fact, that cross-divisional working group that Trevor was referring to, Dr. Archer was referring to, it's all about, we need to do something. And you're absolutely right. As I've mentioned in previous council meetings, I've met with the community groups. Okay, we've studied these issues. We know what the issues are. They want change. Okay, and actually Sharon Beard and Liam O'Fallon, I don't see Liam, but and Dr. Packenham and others are actually working on doing exactly that. So having community forums, so it's not just Rick coming in talking about the research capabilities we have at the NIH, but joining forces. Where's Administrator Regan? I want him next to me. I want him up on the podium with me, because he can do something about this. So Andrew, you're going to be helping us out with this. So we got to get to the point where we can be coordinating these things across federal agencies. Go ahead, Andrew.
Believe me, I have multiple notes in here about, is EPA invited too? Is EPA to the workshop on East Palestine, to the because we are partners in all of these.
And it's really this theme of we can't do it on our own. And it can't. Sharon, do you want to comment on this?
I was just speaking to Andrew to make sure that he got the invite from the last session where we brought in the partners for the North Carolina Community Forum that we're planning, so that we can let them know about the concept and what we're doing, and to pull it in so that we can have more further discussions. But we sent it out to multiple different federal agencies and state agencies, and we had a call this week to discuss that. So it's in the works.
So again, part of my instructions to the working group is that I don't want a community forum where it's just Rick up in front of the group. I've done that in the past. And they made it very clear to me that, okay, if Rick is in front of the group, we need to do something. We want our communities cleaned up. Now, it's made, Dr. Tabak and Congress has made it very clear, NIEHS doesn't do cleanup work. EPA does. So this has got to be a partnership. Go ahead, Andrew.
And ATSDR and CDC,
and absolutely,
of course, address where there are already impacts. Trevor, I think you made a comment about focusing on outcomes as well. And those outcomes are dead critical. We can identify stressors all day long, but removing the impairments that lead to those outcomes is actually how you take action.
Yeah.
And so, we've got work to do, but I think we've got some ways to move forward.
So it's my personal passion is we can't just take it on by ourselves. We have to be developing those partnerships. And community engagement. I think NIEHS is actually one of the ICs of the NIH that has really embraced community engagement. I think we've done a better job of that than most of the other ICs. I think some of the other ICs are discovering the importance of community engagement. We've been doing this for decades. So great. I'm really glad you brought that up. But Daryl, we're going to give you the last question here and last word.
Oh, thank you very much, Director. I just wanted to undergird your sentiment for collaboration. And yes, Dr. Brennan and I were talking in the Lewis Stokes Library last month. We're at the NHIP, that's the Environmental Health Information Partnership. And that is with the National Library of Medicine, HBCUs, and scientists from around the country, HBCUs in particular. And she brought out, and she said she had talked to you about this, of course, the partnership that I hope is part of that collaboration. Didn't see it on that slide. You know, after that you showed there.
Patty and I talk with great regularity, so let me assure you of that. And
Right. But my point is that certainly, as Gary Miller and I always sort of hone in on, the necessity for finding or sort of someone to help us with an ontology for the exposed zone, and particularly with regard to the data repository. They're experts at this, so they are a natural, are they not?
No, they're absolutely experts at this, and again, it's an example of, you know, again, I'm sorry, I can't put everything on the slides.
Right, yeah,
You realize I put way too much on the slides, but let me assure you that you know, my approach is, again, looking broadly across the NIH. Let's start with the NIH, other IC directors. Patty's been a great partner in this, and so I enjoy working with her, and she's very knowledgeable and thoughtful. So I worked with her specifically on the RADx program, the Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics. And so that's where the whole approach there right from the outset was to do this not just as one place, but doing it as a collaborative effort. And I think that the data infrastructure that resulted from that program is a model for what we need to be doing on other things. So stay tuned. I mean, it's a lot of change management. So anytime you're going across, working together with other federal agencies, other institutes and centers of the NIH, you know, there's a discomfort because that's not the way we do things, especially when we want to do things at a breakneck pace. So it's just easier, for example, in the past when we had disasters, it's just easier, we'll do it on our own because trying to get funds transferred from other ICs and other federal agencies is complicated. Well, the thing is we can't do it on our own. And I want to stay, so just rest assured, and hold me to it, I am really committed to the whole collaborative, fostering the collaborative environment to take on these complex issues. So, David, thanks for giving us a little bit of a buffer here. So, I think we better bring it to closure.
I think so, yes.
I want to figure out the healthcare situation.
It's not a call. I'm gonna email the person right now.
Hold on. We need to get
okay, looks sounds like we have a private conversation coming in across the international network.
I think I said something about making sure that you keep yourself on mute.
Okay.
So I neglected in the introductions to introduce the DERT leadership team. So while I'm getting up and Nathan's getting my slides up, if we could have DLC introduce themselves, starting with Jenny, and then just move down the line.
Hello, I'm Jenny Greer. I'm the Chief of Grants Management.
Hello, I'm Cindy Lawler. I'm Chief of Genes, Environment, and Health Branch.
Christy Drew, Chief of the Program Analysis Branch.
Good morning, I'm Claudia Thompson, Chief of the Population Health Branch.
Hi, I'm Srinath Rathur. I'm Acting Branch Chief of Exposure Response and Technology Branch.
Hello, I'm Sharon Beard, Chief of Worker Training and Education Branch.
Michelle Heacock, Acting Branch Chief of the Hazardous Substance Research Branch.
And Alfonso is online. Alfonso?
Yes, thank you, David. Good morning, buenos dias. Alfonso Latoni, I am the Scientific Review Officer and Chief of the Scientific Review Branch. Welcome all to our Institute, North Carolina. Looking forward to a great 2 days of council. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you all. So I will try to move as quickly as I can through this because I want to maintain some time at the end for discussion as I keyed up with council last night. So 5 topics to go through today fairly quickly for some of these staff updates, some activities that we've done since the last council and are planning between now and September council, update on our DEIA activities to queue up some of the conversation for tomorrow, a couple points of emphasis that I'd like to highlight from Big NIH, from Bethesda, and then the bulk of the conversation is going to be on funding strategies for fiscal year 24. We have had a couple staff who've departed DERT since February council, both in grants management, unfortunately. So Robbie Majors, who actually has been with the division since 2009, started as a review support grants review GTA. I don't remember what GTA stands for. Moved into as a program specialist in GEHB, and then moved into grants management in 2016. Left us for a position as a grants management specialist at the CDC. And then Aaron Nicholas, who joined NAEHS in 2008 as a grants management specialist, who brought just a wealth of experience into the division and worked as the specialist on many of our largest and most complex programs, has accepted a position as a specialist at NINDS and left just last week. And then a third departure, Quentin Lee, one of our scientific review officers, retired at the end of March. He joined us in 2021 and worked as a review officer. And we have one new staff member to highlight. Dr. Gerald Lilly joined us as a as a health specialist from the Presidential Management Fellow Program, came to us from CDC, and he'll be working as a health specialist in PAB on several activities, largely around supplement tracking and contract management. And you'll be seeing, hopefully, many, many new faces in September. We currently have 20 active recruitments in the division, both through backfills of staff who've departed, as well as some new positions that, thankfully, Rick gave us to help support the climate change and health activities for the division. So highlighting a few of our activities since the last council meeting. Rick teased the telomere program. We actually had a meeting of the grantees, both supported by NIA and DERT, in this room in March. It was a great meeting. He also, I think, highlighted some of our Nathan, my pointer is stuck. Also highlighted our Chancellor and Environment Work Group, and we had a workshop in February, right after Council, on integrating environmental exposure with other omics technologies. So it feeds on some of that conversation that we had earlier in the year, or earlier in the day. Some upcoming activities to highlight. We have another workshop being organized by the Cancer and Environment Work Group. That one is on molecular signatures of exposure and cancer, trying to tease out some of the specificity of biomarkers for exposure and disease progression. We're having an in-person meeting of our Driven Network. This is the recipients of our diversity supplements. We started a couple years ago, and I'll highlight this in the DEIA activity, really bringing that group together to build a network and a community of our diversity trainees. And for the first time, we're actually going to be doing a joint grantee meeting of our outstanding new environmental scientist awardees, and our river investigators, our R35 investigators, who are really, these two programs are the heart of our efforts to fund people rather than projects. And we've seen a lot of transition from WUNS investigators into the river program. I want to highlight just a couple success stories for the division. So NIH has really been emphasizing getting the word out about successes in our program. And we recently had 2 of our translational impact assessments that were highlighted on the NIH Impacts webpage. So you can see the URL for the NIH tracker here. The first is some efforts by University of Washington and Kathy Carr to develop some interventions using high-efficiency HEPA filters in agricultural communities to decrease the burden of exposure and improve asthma outcomes. And the second is one that is actually very personal to me, having a daughter who was born when I was doing my PhD at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Susan Pinney and Frank Barrow, who were grantees of our Breast Cancer and the Environment Research Program, have been doing a lot of work for almost 2 decades, looking at PFAS exposures in the drinking water system of Cincinnati, Ohio, and working in partnership with the city to improve their filtration activities for the drinking water system, decreasing the burden of PFAS in their drinking water by about 50% in the community. So the next section is going to be some updates on our DEIA activities in the division. And we'll be queuing up some of this conversation for tomorrow. And so I want to start that conversation and our council discussion using this slide and really focusing on the kind of overarching goals of why is this emphasis on DEIA so important for us as a field of environmental sciences. And the first reason for that is that we will have a more diverse and inclusive workforce, that our community in our work group will be better and stronger than it is currently. But the outcome of that and the real raison d'etre is that we will have a stronger research activity because we will be bringing in diverse perspectives and working with people who see the world differently than we do and who bring different skill sets and lived experience into the research community. And then we surround that with the activities that we do. So those are the goals, but how do we accomplish that? And we accomplish that by promoting an internal culture of DEIA, by coordinating our DEIA efforts across the division, across the institute, across the broader community. We've done a lot of efforts to build partnerships with the have-nots, with minority-serving institutions, with HBCUs, with grantee communities that are not receiving the bulk of NIEHS or NIH funding. Being very intentional in our engagement with the grantee community and bringing in diverse perspectives to that. Yes, doing funding opportunities specifically to drive the diversity, and then ultimately feeding that into the analyses and evaluations of our programs, of our community, of our culture, to ensure that we are being inclusive and accessible in our activities. So focusing a little bit on our internal work that we've been doing as a division. We've been doing a lot of training on everything from anti-bullying to having critical conversations and being able to have the conversations that we need to have about the issues that we are facing, both culturally as well as in our research. And I particularly want to highlight some training that we actually started doing with the leadership team on developing and implementing an outward mindset. This is a training that's done by the Arbinger Institute, and I will say that it is the best leadership training that I have ever done. I highly encourage it. It was so good that we did a follow-on training that they do on outward inclusion and have sent 2 members of our staff to be trained as trainers for this so that we can then roll it out on a larger scale to the staff in the division. And so far, we've done 2 sessions that almost 30 members of our division have, in addition to the leadership team, have participated in that training. Our efforts in DEIA actually go back quite a ways. And have some of this we've highlighted in previous council meetings. As I said, we've created a network of our diversity trainees. We've done a number of HBCU and MSI listening sessions, including a report back to them of what we heard from them and what we are doing as a result of the conversations that we've had. We've had staff who've participated in the ABRCAMS and SACNAS meetings for the last several years. I think I'm going to, just in the interest of time, skip that. A couple points of emphasis that I want to bring to your attention. These are things that have come up from big NIH. The first one is on everyone's favorite pain point right now, data management and sharing plans. So as a reminder, this is new policy for NIH. All applications received after January 25th of 2023 are required to include a data management and sharing plan as part of their application. These don't go to peer review, they do come to staff for review. These plans require quite a bit of information from you, including a description of the types of data that you will be generating and collecting, the tools, software, and code that are needed to analyze that data and interpret it, any data standards that are going to be applied to that data, as well as any metadata that is relevant to those data. How you're going to be preserving that data and making it available, including things like access rights to the data, how long it is going to be out in the community, access, distribution, and reuse considerations, any challenges in data access, distribution, and reuse. And then an oversight of the data management and sharing, how we're going to assess the effectiveness of the data sharing going forward. A couple pain points that we've had with the initial review that we've been doing of these. So we have a handful of awards that have worked through to the point where staff is reviewing these. One in particular is this repository. Where is the data going to be made available? We received many questions on where's the environmental health sciences database that I can put my data? And so we heard, and we're here to help. So we've actually put together on the NIEHS webpage at this URL a list of repositories that may be appropriate for the data that you have. This is searchable, so you can literally go to say, what is the kind of data? Is this analytical chemistry data? What's the species that you're working in? Is this human data, fly data, animal, mouse model, what have you? And what types of data access limitations are available for the data. So you can literally get in here and you can see what are the repositories that we have cataloged that are available. We are not endorsing these repositories. None of these are our repositories that we have control of, but this is a resource to help you develop your DSMPs going forward. The second topic I want to highlight is the appropriate citation of grant support. So everyone knows that you have a term and condition of your awards that you need to let the community know that we supported your research. It's not just a term and condition of the award, it's actually a matter of law. This goes back to the Stevens Amendment in 1989 and has been continually included in the Department of Health and Human Services annual appropriations. That there is a requirement for ensuring transparency and accountability in federal spending and acknowledgement of grant support in the presentations of your data. Beyond being a legal matter, it's actually very important to us. Our ability to identify the success of the import of the research that we are supporting depends on the appropriate citation of the grants, linking that. So our evaluation, the first thing we always do is look at what are the publications, as we're doing program analysis. It's also a critical aspect of peer review. So the reviewers for your applications will look at what is the publication record, what is the outcome of the research that you've done before. And this is something that is of significant congressional interest as well. So GAO did an analysis in 2012, and as a part of that report, they came to the conclusion that there's an issue of overcitation, and there's a quote from that report that citations of multiple grants for a single PI on a paper suggest duplicative funding. So it's actually suggestive of overlap in research, which we cannot fund the same research twice. So guidance to the community on when to acknowledge NIH funding. So recipients should only acknowledge NIH awards on publications and other statements when the activities that contributed to that publication, A, directly arise from the award, and B, are within the scope of the award that is being acknowledged. So to help guide your decision-making on whether to cite or not, a couple questions that you can ask. So first, did the personal activities supported by the award contribute to the publication? So you may have 30% of your effort on a particular award, but did that 30% contribute to this work? If it didn't, you should not cite. Did the award support the conduct of the experiments or the analysis of the data that led into the publication? And third, is there a clear and apparent link between the work described in the publication and the aims and objectives of the grant? So if there's a disconnect, you should not cite. How to cite? You have a grant number. The critical part is the activity code, R01, R21, R15, P30, T32. The institution code, ES for NIEHS, and then the unique serial number for your project, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You will also have the type, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, and the support year. Those are less important. You don't have to include those in your acknowledgement. If you include this number, that will link it in our analysis. It is okay to cite multiple grants. So if you have two R01s that are supporting the research, it's okay to cite them if they both did it. I know when I was doing research, we had a grant on cardiac muscle, we had a grant on skeletal muscle. In some of our publications, we used both muscle types in the publication. It's okay to cite that. It's not overlap if you have the differentiation and both grants supported that activity. It's okay to include infrastructure. You should include infrastructure grants that actively supported the work, whether that's a P30, center support, the cohort maintenance programs, those kinds of things. If they actively supported the research that is done, it's okay to cite. If you have a trainee on a T32 or an F or a K, it's appropriate to support those, the salary support that those trainees are getting on the grant. It's also okay to support grants that are no longer active. Just because the grant's over, you can still publish on that, and you should cite the research that support it. But we do, and we will be continuing to look at concerns around overcitation. So if you have 3 R01s and you put them on every paper, expect to get an email from your program officer saying, we need to clean up this publication record here. We don't want to be indicating potential concerns around overlap and double dipping. Now, the bulk of the conversation. Funding strategies for fiscal year 24. So as we make funding decisions, so this is just a little bit of transparency. This is a policy that we implemented more than 10 years ago, that we have some factors that we consider in making funding decisions. The first of these is the scientific merit. We want to fund good quality research. We want to recognize the breadth of the portfolio that we support. We support every organ system. We support every disease. We support everything from technology development to implementation research. And we want to balance across all of that. We have clear priorities across NIH on supporting early stage investigators, new investigators into a field, and those who are at risk. That is that they are supported by only a single grant, and that grant is in danger. We place a priority on continued investment. So if we've been investing in an effort for 30 years and it's at risk, we will place some priority on that. We will also place priority on the innovation. We align our decisions with our programmatic priorities, and we'll bring, if this is in response to a solicitation, a program announcement, or an RFA, that is a factor that we will consider. And then we always have placed a priority on investigator-initiated ideas as well as those of staff. So our practice is that for our R01s and what we call our small Rs, R21s and R03s, we've had a fixed pay line for many years at 10th percentile. So the assumption that if you get 10th percentile, the research is good and it should be supported. We do not have a fixed pay line for our other programs like fellowships, career developments, T32s, small business grants that are kind of light item, and many of those are not percentiled. But we do, in any given year, try to maintain a consistent pay line for those. And for many years, we've tried to keep those in a priority score of 25 to 30, so that we are still prioritizing high quality science that's roughly in line with the 10th percentile pay line for our R01s, R21s. Historically speaking, that pay line has taken about 50% of the competing budget that we have available. So for the remaining 50%, we try to divide that 50-50 between solicited research, that is staff-generated ideas, our program announcements, our RFAs. Those are, of course, set a year to 3 years before the funding line, so that the math is not always perfect on those. And then 50% into our raise to pay applications. That is looking at the applications in the gray zone between 11th percentile and 20th to 25th percentile, that's where we will put in some programmatic prioritization on identifying things that are good science, particularly things that are highly innovative or highly impactful research. This is where the ESI, NI, and at-risk factors will come into way. Many times, the applications that get those scores between 11th and 25th percentile, it's a disagreement between reviewers. You'll have reviewers that are very positive, reviewers who are a little bit more negative. And so we'll look at what are those actual concerns that are raised in the review, and make some judgment calls. Are the concerns that are raised things that are readily addressable in the research as it's unfolding, or do we see a strength that swings us towards the side of supporting a project. We'll look at gaps in our portfolio and look for areas where we want to increase our investment. That will be a factor, as well as that maintaining our existing investments. So we don't want something to go away just because of a small change in the score. So that's our current approach, and we'll come back to some conversation about whether we want to make any changes to that going forward. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about where our current support is going. And starting with some analysis, this is going back over the last 5 years. We've invested about $2.3 billion in our grants programs over the last 5 years. and $1.1 billion of that has gone to just 25 universities. A remaining $900 million of that has gone to a total of 220 other universities. And so combined, that's 86% of our budget has gone strictly into academia. And then a smaller portion, 14%, has gone to non-academics. That's primarily our small business grantees, as well as the grantees of the worker training program, who are largely non-academic organizations and community organizations as well. So we've broken that further down into some bins, looking at how much support has an institution gotten. So for those that have received less than $1 million in support over the 5 years, that's a total of $82 million, up to institutions that have received over $30 million of support over the 5-year period at $1.1 billion. And not surprisingly, the number of awardees that add up to those is conversely correlated. So a total of 60 institutions have received more than $10 million over the 5-year period. That's 74% of the total investment that NAEHS has issued, going to just 60 institutions over a 5-year period. Further breaking that down, we've looked at mechanism and whether that's solicited or unsolicited. It's a little bit of a complex figure. So the hash is the unsolicited portfolio, investigator initiated, and the solid lines are the solicited portfolio that's in response to our RFAs, and then broken down by our R01 equivalents, our centers mechanism, small r, small business training, our resource grants, this is our other line, career development, and then fellowships. And where you see the real, I won't call them disparities, but the really kind of, I think, striking changes are in our centers line, where those top 25 universities, and also our training line, where those top 25 universities are really starting to differentiate themselves from other academics, as well as the other entities in those. Actually fairly consistent, slight trend towards the top 25 for R01s, both solicited and unsolicited, as well as small Rs. And then looking at geographical distribution of those, 6 states receive about 50% of our total investment. That's California, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Texas, and Michigan. And 2 states receive nothing, Wyoming and North Dakota. We've made no awards directly into those states over the last 5 years. So I want to dig down a little bit more into some of the numbers of kind of trends that we're seeing in our portfolio. So the first is on Payline. And looking at our, what is the cost of that maintaining 10% for our R01 and small r portfolios? And those numbers have been increasing kind of year over, they're highly volatile, but the trend is clearly an increase over this is over the last 10 years now, an annual increase of about 10% per year for the cost of maintaining that 10th percentile. And a slightly smaller increase in the number of awards to do that. So about a 7% per year increase in the number of awards within our pay line. So the good news is our applications are actually faring better in peer review, but it is costing us a little bit more to maintain that 10th percentile. And also you can see here when we add in the small r and look at it as a percentage of the total investment, you can see because small r applications are capped at a budget. So R03s are $50,000 a year for 2 years. R21s are $275,000 over a 2-year period. those caps have been in place for many, many years. And so what we're seeing is a slight redistribution of our portfolio from the small Rs being roughly about a quarter of our portfolio to being about a fifth of our portfolio now. R01s are growing, small Rs are not growing. And then, I said we have that roughly 50% pay line of the remaining 50% into solicited and 50% into raise to pay as a high-level goal. And so I wanted to kind of show how well we're doing with that over time. And also the distribution of our awards between the different mechanisms. So this is data that I presented back in February with the budget update. In fiscal 22, our research grants budget was just under $400 million. Of that, 71% went into RPGs. That's R01 small Rs, use R35s, those kinds of things. Roughly 10% went into our centers program, our P30s. 6% went into training. That's primarily our T32s, but also our fellowship grants. 5%, that's a congressional mandate into our small business portfolio, and about 8% into our other research. So that's our career development awards, our cohort maintenance awards here, our R25 short-term training awards, those kinds of programs. So if we look at for our RPG dollars, so this is that 71% bubble. If I can get my pointer back here. So this 71% bubble. Looking over the 5-year trend, where have the costs for those gone, and how's the distribution between our unsolicited pay line? So the purple box is the 10th percentile pay line that I showed on the previous slide. Our raise to pay, our unsolicited raise to pay applications, and then our solicited RPG awards. And so you can see that the pay line has gone up, as I showed. Our raise to pay is very variable and has been between $5 and $13 million, whereas our solicited research has been fairly consistent at about $15 to $20 million. And then looking at our percentages, so as percent of the total, in 2018, we're actually smack on our 50% goal for pay line, and our solicitation was maybe a little bit higher than the 25% goal, but we're doing okay. Pay line is growing as a percentage of our budget, so it's up to about 58% now. And then a last two more little bits of data to present before we get into conversation. We have intentionally, this is purposeful, redistribution of grants from, or our budget from the RPG line, or R01, R03s, R21s, into this other line. So we're putting more of our money into infrastructure programs to support the research that we are doing. Over the last 5 years, we've intentionally made investments in cohort maintenance and in programs like here that have grown the other line. And then the last point that I want to highlight to you is the impact of our non-competing out years. So each year we make awards, and most of those awards, almost all of those awards, will have an out year commitment associated with them. So we'll give an R01, we'll pay this year now, but we've committed to 4 additional years of support of that. So across our portfolio, roughly 75% of our budget is actually tied up in our non-competing awards, our out-year commitments for the awards that we make. And only about a quarter of our budget is available for our competing awards. So with that, I'd like to stop my presentation and turn this over for council discussion. So just in terms of some context of why I'm bringing this to you. First is it's just a good idea for us to have conversation with council about our funding strategies as a division. We've not done this since 2017, and since then we have a new strategic plan with a new strategic plan in the works. We have all new members of council, complete turnover of council. We have a new NAEHS director. We have a new DERT director. So we have a lot of new players and a lot of new perspectives on our budget. And then there's also an elephant in the room. As Rick said, fiscal year 24 is looking to be quite painful. We don't know what the budget is going to be. Congress will be setting our appropriations, but based on what we've heard from the debt ceiling bill, our highest budget is going to be flat at fiscal year 23. And there's some language in that suggests that the floor is about a 5.5% reduction to fiscal year 23. We've been doing some modeling of our budget and looking at those out-year commitments and increasing costs of doing business. And so that if we go at flat at 23, that will, based on our modeling, put us somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million short of being able to meet our pay line with no raise to pays. If we have that 5.5% reduction, that's probably somewhere more on the order of $20 to $25 million short of making our pay line. We can accommodate that. We're going to be able to meet our out-year commitments and pay awards with that. I think that would translate roughly into a reduction of our pay line from the 10th percentile that we've maintained to about 7th percentile to accommodate a flat budget. That $25 million floor probably would set our pay line closer to 2 percentile to be able to balance our budget. We have some strategies that we can implement. We are implementing already of doing multi-year funding for our small R's, making more awards for administrative supplements that syncs up one-year money, does not build in significant out-year commitments. So I don't think that the story is going to be quite that bleak for fiscal year 24, but I do want to get some input from council, both in terms of a larger context of funding strategies that we should be implementing on where we should be weighing factors such as maintaining a pay line versus putting money into programmatic priority raise to pays, how much we should be emphasizing investigator-initiated research versus our staff-driven research, our R01 traditional research project grants versus our small R's versus other activities such as these infrastructure and training programs, and then some factors around diversity of our grantee community. So how much should we be concerned about the trends that we see of 25 universities receiving about 50% of our funding versus other academics versus non-academic grantees? And how much priority should we be placing on early stage and new investigators versus our established environmental health sciences investigators? And maybe even some conversation around mid-career. So we can place a priority on funding early stage investigators. When they come back in for the renewal, how much emphasis do we place on that kind of first transition in the academic career? And then finally, I'd like your thoughts on, if fiscal 24 turns out to be particularly painful, on top of those, higher order strategies, where should we really be prioritizing if we have to make some significant reductions to some of our budget lines? Where should we be placing some emphasis in those? With that, we've got about 6 minutes left for discussion. If I can ask one of the members of DLC on the Zoom to kind of moderate for people who've got their hands up and just tee up who's got questions, because I can't see the gallery from up here. Thanks, Christine. Gary.
Okay, yeah, I mean, these are some significant challenges. I do think there's a very big risk of having the pay line under 10% because many of our investigators get funded from other institutes. And if it goes way below 10, they'll stop coming to NIEHS. And I think that that would be dangerous to the institute and our mission. I do think this top 25 piece, and I'm certain to be in that top 25 university, is I do think that's a place that could absorb a bit more budget cut. So if you were to take the ones that had P30s and super funds and decrease their out years a little bit, they would be able to absorb it better than those smaller institutions. But part of that is that you have about 20 P30s, and they're probably most of those top 25. The T32s are probably also skewed that way, as are super funds. So it's like you're already investing in those top 25. It's no surprise that they're doing that because you're encouraging that. You're making them stronger. They recruit more scientists. They recruit more faculty. So, but I really think that if it goes below 10%, if it's a temporary thing, that might be okay for a year or two. But I think it's really critical to strive to stay towards 10 because the institutes are a lot lower than that. People run away from them.
So if I could ask a follow-up question, Gary, where is that balance between the 10th percentile pay line and RTP? So we've actually frequently promoted the fact that we do a lot more select pays than other institutes as a benefit of applying to NIEHS because you have somebody that's applying a filter as opposed to saying, we have $20 million available this council round, we're going to pay in order up to $20 million and then stop. So is there a sociological difference there that maybe we can promote a benefit to NIEHS?
Hey, David, if I could just...
I think if you had that raise to pay, maybe that comes down a little bit. So you don't raise to pay if it's not under 14% or something. But I do think the flexibility is good, but it can't be... the idea is if you go and get a 9th percentile on a grant and you don't get funded, people stop going to that institute.
I think Rick had a comment as well.
Actually, no, let's move on. Let's get comments from council.
Okay. Irva.
Yeah, I have a comment, but could you just clarify exactly what falls under the solicited category? I mean, you've got RFAs, then you've got that's also including the P grants and the T grants and F grants, or
yeah. So anything that is responsive, that is in response to a targeted solicitation. So if we do a program announcement, a PAR, which is a program announcement with special referral, or an RFA, that would qualify as solicited research. If it is to a parent announcement for, we have NIH has a program for R01s. There's no scientific focus for that. That's an investigator-initiated or unsolicited award.
Okay, so the NOCs are also in the solicited category then, or are they?
So NOCs are complicated. Most NOCs will target the parent announcement, so those would be classified as being unsolicited research. They're complicated.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think I would second what Gary said because and we already are having that because of all the funding that's going into Alzheimer's. We've got everybody's running to study Alzheimer's because it's got a 40% pay line, which is we can't compete with that. And we've got people doing environmental studies and they're not even that interested in our center because they've gotten so nicely funded. I think the other, the race to pay, it's interesting that you said that well, we balance it that way. I don't know that people understand outside of kind of this sort of inner circle of those of us who are sort of closer to the Institute, really understand what that means. It's like, oh, well, you could still, but it sort of feels like, well, but that's kind of a long shot, and maybe it happens and maybe it doesn't happen. If, you know, what I've seen of some of the junior investigators we've had who've gotten a lot of 13% and 11%, and then it takes the third or fourth try before they actually get funded. So, I do think that trying to keep to that 10% would be really important. I also want to say that the diversity efforts, I think, should not be cut. If anything, I'd want to see more funding going into that. And yeah, cutting, the cutting of the top 25. I'd like to see that list also of who those top 25 are in that category.
Yeah, and we do have the list we can share, but I think many, looking at who has the P30s and the T32s gives you a pretty good indication of who's on the top 25, as Gary hinted. Okay, Trevor?
Yeah, I'd like to know what proportion of the R01s are non-modular, because the non-modular amount has stayed fixed at 250K for more than 10 years. And I'm thinking one way out of this would actually to make all grants modular, but increase the modular amount to something more reasonable.
Yeah, I think, Jenny, you may know a little bit better than me, but I think it's actually become fairly unusual for us to get a modular application. Almost all of our R01 applications are categorical budgets now.
But I'm thinking that if you increase the modular amount from, say, 250 to, say, 350, right? I don't know what impact that might have, but cap grants at that level, then you might better stay to the 10% pay line.
Karen, I think you're next.
Yeah, I agree with what Trevor just said was a point I was going to make as well. About the non-modular budgets versus modular. The other comment that I wanted to make, and I'm sure that you won't, this won't be popular with you, but I think the raise to pay, and I also think the River program and the ones put a lot of money into sometimes not the top science. I will just say, I mean, maybe if you reduce the years or the amount per year to ensure, it's a great idea, but you have to make sure that somebody's making truly productive advancements with impactful research before investing such a large amount in one person. So if we're going by merit or by person, but I still think that person needs to show merit. So I think we should always go by merit. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the opinion. Is Phil next, I think?
Yeah. Hi. A couple of thoughts, I guess. One is that maybe I don't know how to quite say this, but the solicited versus unsolicited, is there an implication there that what is being put out as RFAs and so forth is not in keeping with necessarily with where the scientists see the work going? And is that a consideration? I just raised that as a question. The other thought I had was there are 26 other institutes and centers out there, all who do this kind of analysis. And I'm wondering if you've encountered any, are you in any way an outlier relative to other institutes and centers? I know pay lines are different and all that, but what goes into, how much money goes to the top institutions and things like that? Obviously, they do that kind of analysis. And are there lessons that they've come up with to address some of these, what I would regard as inequalities personally?
Yeah, it's a great question, Phil. And yeah, obviously this is something that all institutes are struggling with, particularly this relatively small number of institutions that are gathering a relatively high percentage. And our trend of 25% getting 50% may not be universal across NIH, but I don't think that we're an outlier in that regard. In terms of funding strategies, there are 27 institutes and centers, 24 grant-making institutes and centers, and there are at least 24 different ways of doing it. So there is no consistency across. There are institutes that don't have a pay line. They have a first percentile pay line, and everything is done as raise to pay. And there are institutions that will put everything into we have $20 million available, we'll pay an order up to $20 million. There are institutes that place the majority of their funds, so Human Genome, for instance, place the majority of their funds into solicited research with very little investigator-initiated. And there are institutes that do relatively few solicitations and prioritize investigator-initiated. We've always tried to foster a balance at NAEHS, and I think that's kind of where we fall out in the middle because we try to foster that balance, I think. Rick?
Just want to make a comment. I'm hearing that there seems to be confusion about the whole raise to pay issue. And where do we come up with these ideas for solicitations? I just want to remind everyone that we spend a lot of time on strategic planning, and the goals and the issues around the strategic plan are from all of you. And so when we have an RFA, this is not just an idea we're pulling out of the air. We're actually cross-referencing it with the strategic plan that all of you have helped us develop. And as well as the raise to pays, those are all cross-referenced to how well the grant is in the 11th percentile. They align really well with the strategic priorities that we collectively have developed as part of our strategic plan. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that these raise to pay and RFAs and other things are not just coming out of the air. They're strongly correlated with the strategic plan. And I think the DERT does a fabulous job of connecting the things we fund with our strategic plan. And actually, I can call out Christy Drew and Christy Pettibone and others. They have the tools to give us the ability to make those connections. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, and Rick, I think that's a perfect comment for us to adjourn temporarily for lunch. We're just about 6 or 7 minutes behind schedule, so I think we should be fine. And we'll look to start up again at 1 o'clock with our intramural presentation from Dr. Kelly Ferguson.